The moment my son unfolded the $20 bill at the Thanksgiving table, the room went quiet in a way that felt intentional. Around him, laughter exploded as boxes were torn open. A brand new PS5 for my sister's son. Another console for the cousin across the table. Cheers, high fives, photos taken for social media. Then there was my 12-year-old, standing there with a thin smile, holding cash like it was a joke someone forgot to explain. My stepfather clapped his hands and made a comment about learning the value of money early. A few people laughed. Someone added that not every kid deserves expensive toys. Eyes flicked toward my son, then away, like the point had been made clearly enough. I watched his face carefully. The way his jaw tightened. The way he blinked too fast. Tears did not fall, but I could see them burning. He nodded, said thank you, and folded the bill with shaking fingers. That hurt more than if he had cried. I wanted to speak. I wanted to end the moment. But I stayed still. Because this was not the first time they reminded us where we stood. Every holiday followed the same pattern. Praise for some. Lessons for others. They called it fairness. They called it discipline. What it really was control wrapped in tradition. They believed kindness should be earned and respect should be rationed. My son sat down quietly, pushing food around his plate while the room buzzed with excitement that did not include him. No one noticed when he excused himself. I found him later in the hallway, staring at a family photo where he barely appeared in the corner. He asked me if he had done something wrong. I told him no. I told him some people give based on who they think matters. That night, as we drove home, he stared out the window and said nothing. I made a decision then. Not out of anger, but clarity. I would not teach him to beg for space at tables that enjoyed shrinking him. I would teach him something else. And one day, they would learn it too. The weeks after Thanksgiving passed quietly, but something had shifted inside our house. My son did not complain. He did not ask for the things he once pointed out in store windows. Instead, he started asking questions. Not childish ones. Careful ones. How money works. How people get ahead. Why some families decide who deserves more before anything even happens. I answered honestly, without bitterness. I told him life does not always reward effort immediately, but it always keeps records. I told him humiliation can either shrink you or sharpen you. He listened in a way that told me he was choosing the second. At school, he threw himself into his work. Teachers began emailing about his focus, his curiosity, his ability to solve problems faster than expected. I saved every message, not to prove anything, but because I wanted him to see progress is real even when applause is missing. Meanwhile, my stepfather liked to remind us of that Thanksgiving. He joked about it at Christmas, saying $20 builds character. He said it loudly, in front of others, like it was a lesson he deserved credit for. I smiled politely and said nothing. Silence made him comfortable. That was useful. Family gatherings continued. The pattern stayed the same. New gadgets for some kids. Practical gifts for my son. Books. Socks. Advice. They framed it as wisdom. I watched how they spoke to him, how expectations were lowered before he even tried. What they did not see were the late nights. My son teaching himself skills far beyond his grade level. Online courses he found on his own. Competitions he entered without telling anyone. I supported quietly, staying in the background the way he seemed to prefer. Years passed like that. The PS5 became outdated. Newer models replaced them. The excitement faded. But my son kept building, stacking small wins that no one in that family knew about. Scholarships. Recognition. Opportunities that did not need their approval. Then came the invitation. A big family reunion planned around another holiday, much larger than Thanksgiving. They wanted everyone there. They mentioned pride, success, togetherness. The words felt familiar. My stepfather added a note, saying it would be good for my son to see how far the family had come. I looked at my son when I read it. He was older now. Taller. Calmer. There was a steadiness in his eyes I did not recognize from before. He asked if we were going. I said yes. Because this time, they were not the ones bringing gifts to the table. They were about to realize who they had underestimated all along. The months leading up to the reunion felt like a slow countdown. My son did not talk about it much, but I could tell he was preparing in his own way. He organized his schedule more tightly. He practiced explaining things out loud, then stopped, deciding silence would say more. Watching him, I realized he had already learned what took me years to understand. We arrived early on the day of the gathering. The house was bigger than before, upgraded, remodeled, proudly displayed like proof of progress. Cars lined the driveway, newer and louder. Success was meant to be visible here. Inside, the familiar hierarchy took shape quickly. The kids who once unwrapped consoles now compared phones and vacations. My stepfather moved through the room like a host who believed he owned every outcome. When he saw my son, he smiled with the same practiced confidence and commented on how fast kids grow when expectations stay low. I said nothing. My son nodded politely, his expression neutral. He did not correct him. That restraint made me uneasy in a way I could not explain yet. As dinner approached, conversations grew louder. People talked about jobs, investments, plans. Someone asked my stepfather about a business decision he had made recently. He answered proudly, describing risk and reward, emphasizing how important guidance is for young people who lack direction. My son listened closely. Then a relative mentioned an upcoming project, one that needed expertise they had not been able to find. They joked about having to look outside the family for help. Laughter followed. I noticed my son glance at me for just a moment. A silent question. I gave a small nod. Later, as plates were cleared, my stepfather raised his glass to make a toast. He talked about teaching lessons, about how small moments shape character. He referenced that Thanksgiving again, smiling as if it were a fond memory. This time, the room laughed louder. My son did not. When the toast ended, someone asked my son what he was studying now. The question sounded casual, but curiosity had crept in. He answered simply, without details, and the attention moved on. But not everyone let it go. A guest who worked in the same field my son had quietly entered asked to follow up. Then another. The questions sharpened, more technical, more specific. The room began to slow, conversations overlapping less. I watched my stepfather's smile tighten as he realized something had changed. The moment was not explosive. It was subtle, like a shift in air pressure before a storm. And it was only just beginning. The questions did not stop after that. What started as polite curiosity turned into focused attention. My son answered calmly, choosing his words carefully, never volunteering more than necessary. Each response landed with quiet confidence, the kind that does not ask for approval. The guest nodded slowly, impressed. Others leaned in. Someone pulled out a phone to check something, then looked up again, surprised. I recognized that look. It was the moment when assumptions begin to crack. My stepfather noticed too. He stepped closer, placing a hand on the back of a chair, smiling as if he were still in control. He redirected the conversation, making a joke about kids these days thinking they know everything from the internet. A few people laughed out of habit, but the sound lacked conviction. Dinner was served, and once again, seating told its own story. My son and I were placed near the end of the table. Not leftovers this time, but distance. Out of sight, out of mind. They thought the moment had passed. It had not. Across the table, a relative mentioned a failed deal that had cost them months of work. They complained about consultants who promised results and disappeared. The frustration was real. The problem unsolved. My son listened quietly, then asked one careful question. Just one. It reframed the entire issue. The relative paused, then admitted they had not considered that angle. Others chimed in, suddenly engaged. I watched my stepfather stiffen. He tried to reclaim the spotlight, explaining how complex these things are, how experience matters more than theory. My son nodded respectfully, then clarified something so precisely that the table went silent again. This time, no one laughed. A phone buzzed. Someone whispered that they recognized his name from an article. Another guest confirmed it, pulling up a page and reading silently. Eyes widened. Heads lifted. The energy shifted, undeniable now. My stepfather asked what article they were talking about. No one answered him right away. The realization hit him slowly, and that made it worse. He looked at my son as if seeing him for the first time, searching for the familiar weakness that used to make him comfortable. It was gone. In its place was something steadier. Earned. The kids who once showed off their consoles stared at their plates. Conversations around success suddenly felt dangerous, like any word might expose ignorance. I stayed quiet, letting the moment unfold without interference. Because what they were discovering at that table was not just my son's ability. It was how wrong they had been about him. And they were only beginning to understand the cost of that mistake. The dinner dragged on, but no one was truly eating anymore. Plates cooled untouched while attention drifted back to my son again and again, even when no one directly addressed him. His presence had become the unspoken center of the room, and that unsettled the people who once controlled every conversation. My stepfather tried to regain his footing by telling a story from the past, something loud and familiar. He spoke about discipline, about how some kids need tough lessons to survive the real world. He glanced at my son as he spoke, expecting the old reaction. Deference. Gratitude. Silence. Instead, my son simply listened. That calm unsettled him more than defiance ever could. A guest across the table asked my son where he had learned what he knew. The question carried weight now. My son answered honestly but briefly, mentioning years of study, practice, and trial. No mention of struggle. No reference to being overlooked. Just facts. Someone else asked if he was currently working on anything. My son paused before answering, then said he was finishing something that would launch soon. Nothing more. The restraint was deliberate, and it drew everyone closer. My stepfather laughed, trying to break the tension. He joked that young people always think their projects will change everything. This time, no one joined him. A relative quietly asked for a name, just to look it up. My son gave it. Phones came out again. Screens glowed. Whispers traveled down the table faster than conversation. A sharp intake of breath from someone near the center confirmed it. This was not speculation anymore. I watched my stepfather's posture collapse inch by inch. He was no longer standing tall. He leaned on the chair now, like it might steady him. His face drained of its practiced authority. He asked when this had happened. How long this had been going on. My son answered that it had taken years. That single word landed harder than anything else. Years. While they handed out consoles. While they joked about $20 building character. While they congratulated themselves on teaching lessons. Silence followed. Heavy and complete. Then someone asked the question that changed everything. Had anyone in the family known? My son looked at me. And for the first time that night, I spoke. I said yes. The room froze. Because that meant this was not sudden success. It was long, quiet, deliberate. And they had missed all of it. The silence after my answer pressed down on the room like weight. People shifted in their seats, suddenly aware that they had been witnesses to something far bigger than a family gathering. This was no longer about gifts or jokes. It was about perspective and how badly it had been misjudged. My stepfather tried to laugh it off, but the sound came out wrong. He said of course parents cannot track everything kids do, that surprises happen. The words felt thin. No one nodded. No one agreed. A guest asked how long I had known. I answered truthfully, explaining that I had seen the work, the effort, the discipline, long before anyone else noticed. I did not frame it as sacrifice. I framed it as consistency. That distinction mattered. My son stayed quiet, letting the attention settle where it belonged. That restraint gave his presence gravity. People now addressed questions to him directly, careful with their tone, choosing words they would not regret later. My stepfather interrupted again, reminding everyone that success is unpredictable, that early encouragement does not always pay off. He was searching for ground that still belonged to him. But the ground was gone. Someone mentioned potential partnerships. Another spoke about opportunities that aligned perfectly with what my son had built. The conversation shifted from curiosity to interest, then to something closer to respect. I saw panic flash across my stepfather's face. He pulled my son aside near the hallway, lowering his voice. I could not hear the words, but I could see the posture. The appeal. the sudden warmth. My son listened politely, nodded once, and stepped back toward the table. When my stepfather returned, his confidence was gone. In its place was urgency. He announced that family should support family, that this was a moment to reconnect and move forward together. The timing was wrong. Everyone could feel it. A relative asked what kind of support he meant. Financial, strategic, personal. My stepfather hesitated. That hesitation exposed everything. Because it revealed the truth they were all beginning to see. The same people who mocked a child with $20 were now calculating what they could gain from the adult he had become. My son met my eyes again. There was no anger there. Just clarity. The night was approaching its breaking point. And the hardest part was still ahead. The room felt smaller as intentions became obvious. Conversations turned careful, almost strategic. People who once ignored my son now positioned themselves closer, asking questions with softened voices and practiced smiles. The shift was uncomfortable to watch, like a crowd rearranging itself around a new center of gravity. My stepfather tried again to reclaim control. He spoke about legacy, about guiding the next generation, about how family should stand together when success arrives. The words sounded generous, but the timing exposed them. Too late. Too transparent. My son listened without reacting. He did not push back. He did not correct anyone. That restraint unsettled them more than rejection ever could. It forced them to sit with their own behavior. A relative asked about expansion plans. Another mentioned resources they could offer. The same people who once laughed at a folded $20 bill were now presenting themselves as allies. It happened so quickly it felt rehearsed, even though it clearly was not. My stepfather leaned closer to my son again, this time with desperation leaking through his composure. He spoke softly, gesturing toward the house, the family, the history. He was selling belonging. My son responded calmly, saying he appreciated the interest, but had already built something with people who believed in him before the results were visible. That sentence changed everything. The table went quiet again, but this time it was not curiosity. It was realization. The door they assumed would always be open had already closed. Someone asked what came next for him. My son said he was focused on growth and choosing partners carefully. He emphasized trust, long-term vision, accountability. Each word felt like a mirror held up to the past. I watched my stepfather's face as the truth settled in. This was not a moment he could spin. This was not a lesson he could claim credit for. The success in front of him existed without his approval, without his guidance, without his generosity. The gathering began to dissolve after that. Excuses were made. Hugs felt forced. Promises were vague. People left carrying a new story, one they would repeat carefully. As we prepared to leave, my stepfather finally spoke plainly. He asked if there was any way my son could help him with something important. My son paused before answering. And in that pause, everything they had done came rushing back. The begging had begun. And my son was finally the one in control. My son did not answer immediately. He looked around the room one last time, taking in the faces that had once dismissed him, measured him, reduced him to lessons and jokes. There was no anger in his expression, only memory. He told my stepfather that help is built on respect, not regret. That support means believing in someone before their value becomes obvious. His voice was calm, steady, and final. My stepfather tried again. He spoke about mistakes, about intentions, about how family should forgive and move forward. But forgiveness was not what my son was offering. He was offering clarity. He explained that his success had come from years of being underestimated, from learning to work without praise, from building without permission, and that the people who benefited from that work were those who stood by him when nothing was guaranteed. He said he wished them well. Nothing more. That was when it truly hit them. There would be no deal. No shortcut. No reclaiming control by calling it family. The power they once held had shifted completely, and it had done so without noise or confrontation. We left the house quietly. No dramatic exit. No raised voices. Just the sound of a door closing behind us. On the drive home, my son stared out the window like he had years ago after that Thanksgiving. But this time, his posture was different. Lighter. Grounded. He said something then that stayed with me. He said the $20 taught him exactly what they intended, just not the lesson they wanted. It taught him who believed in him and who never did. I smiled and kept driving. Because the people who once mocked him would now remember that holiday forever. Not for the gifts they gave, but for the moment they realized they had invested in the wrong narrative. And my son never needed revenge. He became it. Tell me in the comments section that which part hit you the most. If you like this story, subscribe to this channel, share this story with someone who truly deserves to watch this story, because somewhere in this world, someone is facing the same circumstances in their own family. See you in the next one.